Maybe there's a text there too that'll heal you. We should get one under Temple Beth and me, and then we could have another stream of income. We could heal
There you
people.
go.
We could heal people. Well, I think I got us on the Facebook. We've got most people, I think, or we have a minion, so we're gonna start. We're gonna start in a second. We have almost everybody.
You're not on Facebook, Rabbi.
A Zoom minion.
We have our Zoom minion. Hold it a second. Yeah, you're right. Why am I not? I tried.
I don't know. My machine says you're on Facebook.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
mine did.
Yeah. We're there. You're Mike. I'm looking at you on Facebook, and there are people on Facebook. So welcome, Facebook.
Oh, yeah, you are on Facebook. Usually I get a notification. I didn't get a notification.
Yeah, we're on.
I'm getting a notification. It said
you
Nate
know.
is now live on Facebook. Yeah.
Huh.
We got it. So I'm coming to you right now, live from the Las Vegas Strip. I'm actually I'm here. Honestly, I'm here for business. I had some meetings yesterday, and
Yeah, $25 on black.
yeah, that's right. Okay, Mike. I'll do that as soon as we're done. And then, we had some.
And $25 on the Dodgers to win the World Series.
That pays nothing, by the way, Mike. I just want you to know, like 4.5 to 1. Like you can win nothing on that. They are so favored. They are so heavily favored. It's ridiculous. But this should be. It's literally like they're assuming that that's what's going to happen. Yeah, but look, sometimes it does. I mean, people predicted the Chiefs were going to win the Super Bowl, and it happened. So yeah, sometimes those predictions, those heavily favored teams do. But yeah, it's just hopefully going to be not a complete letdown. That's all I'm reading now. It's going to be the greatest season of the year, or the Dodgers are going to have an October disaster. Like you see those headlines, people just don't know what to say. Just sit back and enjoy it. I mean, it's I guess we can enjoy it. True, it's not, other teams are not necessarily going to enjoy it,
But are you getting up at 3:00 in the morning to watch the game?
what do you think?
No.
100%. I'm not getting up. I'm going to be up.
Oh.
I
I'm recording it.
I slept really good last night. Well, I'm here. Yeah, I mean, I'm in a place where I could sit in a place and watch it with people at 3:00 in the morning. Think about that. No, I didn't.
Yeah, exactly. In Vegas.
That's not why I came here, but I am.
Yeah, sure.
I 100% am planning on watching it. So I think
That's
maybe
pretty amazing. When you think about it, actually.
maybe I'll fail, but I watched the Super Bowl, as some people knew. I watched it in Israel, not this last one, but February of 23. I was in Israel, and I watched it. I watched it from a hotel in Tiberias. So it was not easy to do. And I watched the Super Bowl up until it ended at about 3:30 in the morning. Didn't start at 3:00, but it ended at about 3. And there were people there. There are people on this call who can attest to the fact that I did watch the game, because Floyd was there, and there were other people who were there. Well, Rosemary was already back home, but I did, in fact, with one other person on the trip, Victor, we watched the game. Somebody came down for part of it. I don't know if it was John or somebody saw the beginning of the game with us, and then it was just me and Victor the rest of the time.
Absolutely, it was not me. I was sleeping, and I cannot attest that you saw or did see that you did see or did not see, because I was asleep.
Yeah, you were asleep, but there was somebody who did come down at the beginning and watched, and I think it was a member of our Jewish community, because the only person who did was Victor, who was from John Shaver's church in Encinitas. He was the only one who made it through. But there was one person from our synagogue I know who was with me, like maybe for not the first quarter even. But anyways, the point is that I've done crazier stuff, and but this should be fun. So where we left off, actually, and I'm going to show you a picture from Israel in a moment. Where we left off, where Rosemary finished reading last week, was the end of the first chapter of Jonah, and it ended, we read about Jonah's mission to go to Nineveh and simply tell the people there to repent, and just to look at the beginning of actually not even to repent, but just tell them that their wickedness has come before God. That's the only thing. And of course, Jonah does the opposite. He goes in the opposite direction. And what we read about last time, and we studied it in depth, was the what happens to him on the ship, which was most of chapter 1. So he boards the ship in verse 3. Verse 3, he jumps on the ship, and the rest of it, all the way to verse 15, is when he gets thrown overboard. So pretty much all of chapter 1, he's on the ship. The very last verse, he's thrown off. Then we follow the crew to, we assume, Israel. They maybe sacrificed where they were, but doesn't really say that they got off the ship, quite frankly, but it says they feared God greatly after, and they offered a sacrifice, and they made vows, which we assume is they converted. The rabbis interpret that clearly when they say they made vows. They made vows to start worshiping God. Now, this was not just random vow, which I think is fair. I don't think that's a extreme case of rabbinic license, so to speak, that their vows are vows pertaining to their worship of God, because it says they feared God greatly. And the word that we used, and it was used a lot in this, we talked about words that got repeated, directional words of like going down, the word kum, to go up, which he doesn't do. So the directional words are used a lot. The word for sleep is used a lot, but it's not just sleep, it's going down into sleep. It's like almost a coma. But we also have the word fear used a lot, and it's used here again. And it says that they feared God greatly. And by the way, the phrase to fear God, Yirat Adonai or Yirat Hashem, as we say in modern Hebrew today, the phrase is still used often in Jewish parlance today. It means to believe, to be a believer. We actually use that phrase, to fear God, as somebody who has a sense of God's presence. So fear is part of it, obviously. There's other words, love and trying to think of what other words we use for God, but fear is the one that's the most common, actually, in the Jewish language. And we actually classified people who kind of went through a quasi conversion or acceptance of Judaism. We called them God-fearers. And there was literally a whole class of people during the Greco-Roman period, not during the time of Jonah, but maybe closer to when Jonah was written, and then all the way through the Roman period, of people who became what we call God-fearers, people who didn't formally convert to Judaism, perhaps, but believed in God, believed in the one God, maybe even, again, according to what we see, went to synagogue or went to the temple in Jerusalem. We know that they went to synagogues because we have dedications where they donated money to the synagogue. And they also maybe took on some Jewish practices, but maybe others they didn't. So maybe they didn't take on all the mitzvot. Maybe they didn't go through circumcision. Maybe they didn't keep kosher, but they did have some allegiance to God. And we call those people God-fearers. The rabbis called them that. They called themselves that. The community called them that, because, again, we have the phrase in Hebrew and in Greek for the people who were God-fearers. So the fact that these people fear God, it's not only is it not uncommon, it's actually kind of the standard language for people who have that relationship with God. We haven't seen anything like this until today, until the modern era, where we have thousands, if not millions of people who have attached themselves either to the Jewish community or to our Jewish concept of God, and who probably would be considered God-fearers. Today, you don't have to be even connected to the Jewish community to have this, but my guess is that if not the majority, very close to the majority of Americans and people in the Western world would probably classify themselves more as a God-fearer than as a believer in any faith, or definitely in Christianity. Judaism still has an element of ethnicity to it, but if most people were classified theologically by what they believed, they probably would be considered God-fearers. They probably would say, I believe in a higher power, I believe in one God, I believe in God. And a lot of what they would kind of theologically at least say, not again necessarily by their practice or by their ethnicity or by their peoplehood, would probably theologically maybe be similar to this crew of sailors who get off the ship, or at least after this experience. I won't say they get off the ship, doesn't say. Could have offered their sacrifice right there on the ship. They could have had an altar right on the ship that they made to God. They seem to get it. They seem to at least now be connected in that way. So Jonah is off the ship. Any questions or comments or any thoughts from anybody right now before we jump into chapter 2? Chapter 2 is a lot different, except for the first verse. The first verse is actually the first two verses. Rosemary, why don't you read for us the first two verses?
God provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah remained in the fish's belly 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah prayed to the eternal his God from the belly of the fish.
All right. So before we move any further than these two verses, okay? And Judith just joined with us. Hey, Judith. If we just look at these two verses, this is where things kind of get crazy. I mean, the ship was crazy. There's no question. The ship was a disaster. It was a tempest. But those things happen. Somebody getting swallowed by a big fish, that doesn't happen a lot. This is where people's minds get blown. And this is what becomes kind of the focal point, the memorable part, and the focal point of Jonah's story, and really kind of propels it into one of the most famous stories of the Bible. These two verses and one last verse at the end of this. But it's this part that blows people's minds. It's this part where people captures the imagination and where people start saying, okay, what's going on here? This is amazing. And it captures the imagination to the point, again, where people use it as a symbol, where it becomes, like a literally the transcendent message of what God can do to save somebody and to kind of cause nature. It's God's working in nature in a way that's going to throw things for a loop, if you will. But it's 2 verses, or 3 when he leaves them. But again, much of basically all of the first chapter is him on the boat. There's a couple verses of him off the boat, but that's what we remember. Well, I should say that's what in our imagination we remember. But it's a very little part of the story. We really don't have much. In the Midrash, we have legends about what Jonah experiences in the belly of the fish. For artists and people who try to develop the imagination, our imagination into like visual aspects, they love this piece. I'll show you. Actually, I'll show you a couple pieces of art here.
My
This is
Sarah made a big whale, that
Oh,
the kids
geez.
actually went in and sat in.
Wow.
It was kid size, and the kids all made it together. They created this.
And then they went inside the fish.
Yeah, they could go inside the fish, especially if they'd done something that was not really good. They would go sit in the fish
Oh, wow.
and think it out. Yeah, she really built this out of wire and paint, and it was in the playground. It was very cool.
That is very cool. And I think it's interesting that well, part of and again, one of the cool things about what Sarah does is take the Torah and put it into art. But obviously for a long time, that wasn't done with the same type of energy in the Jewish community for different reasons, partly because of interpretations of the Torah on art, but also interestingly because obviously for a long time Jews couldn't be members of guilds and couldn't be members of groups where artists were participating and protected as the way art was done, at least in the Middle Ages. This is a very common image, though, from the Roman world, I would say, because this is a Byzantine art. This is from a sarcophagus, and it's one of the most common images that you'll see in early Christian art. Churches, yes, absolutely. You'll see lots of Jonahs on early church in early churches, and even through the Middle Ages, you'll see depictions of Jonah. The main reason is because Jonah is in the belly for 3 days. And according to Christian stories, Jesus was buried, was in a tomb for 3 days, and then was resurrected. And so the story of Jonah prefigures Jesus. Now you'd say, well, but Jonah wasn't dead. But the imagery, at least the interpretation, the Christian midrash, if you will, is that Jesus really wasn't dead either. He was in the process of essentially being resurrected and being reborn. And when he comes out, and when Jonah comes out of the belly of the fish, it's as if he was reborn, literally coming out of the womb of the fish. And when Jesus comes out of the tomb, he's reborn, he's resurrected in a new life. And so the imagery was really powerful for Christians who, again, made the connection between Jesus and Jonah and then depicted it. And then what they did, which was really special and very midrashic and very psychologically telling, is they interpreted that for themselves. And so every sarcophagus that has a picture of Jonah, again, with the connection to Jesus and resurrection, then makes the connection, right, that the person that's in that sarcophagus will be resurrected. So it's not just an artistic statement, it's a theological statement. It's a statement of like what people were hoping would happen to them, that this sarcophagus would open like Jesus's tomb, like the belly of the whale, and I will come out of this one day. So this image is super important. We find it all over sarcophagi throughout the Christian world. Interestingly, we don't see it in the Jewish world because we don't have that connection to Jesus. We don't have that connection to resurrection. And so it's not, Jews believed in the resurrection of a human body. Don't get me wrong. That's where Christianity got it from. But the concept of being in the womb and then being in the belly of the whale and then being in the tomb, that wasn't part. We didn't have that connection, but Christians did. And so what's so powerful about this for Christians was that this story then becomes not just Jonah's story and Jesus' story, but my story. And so that's what happens with these depictions. And so it's interesting to think, did the artist did this guy carve what he thought Jonah looked like, or what Jesus looked like, or what the guy inside the tomb looks like? So this is kind of a midrashic art. So here you can see the fish, the great fish, and then this is Jonah. Now, we were obviously we were around during these days. I mean, these are our stories. We weren't as fascinated with Jonah in our art as the Christians were. Which is interesting because again, it's our story. It's from the Hebrew Bible. But I will show you, we do have fish and we did have art. But I will show you, like when we do art, what it is when it comes to fish. Like here's a picture that I found of a fish swallowing somebody, a big fish swallowing somebody. This is from a synagogue mosaic, which is where we get most of our art. We don't have three-dimensional art, primarily because again, that was definitely seen as a violation of the Ten Commandments. So building statues of things or carving things of depictions of people, that was something we didn't do. But mosaics, which technically are three-dimensional, but aren't really. They're really art almost on a canvas, like flat surface. We were okay with that. And so we see beautiful mosaics. This one is roughly from the same period that you just saw that sarcophagi from. But this is our art. This is an art piece from a synagogue in Hukok in northern Israel, in the Galilee. And Hukok has some beautiful mosaics. They've actually just done some. I was just reading about some more excavation, some stuff that they found at Hukok just recently. But this is a picture of a fish swallowing somebody. You can see it. Does anyone want to guess what this is? A depiction of? Anybody?
Oh, Pharaoh's soldiers?
Absolutely, Rosemary. This is Pharaoh soldiers. What gave it away?
Well, I just tried to think of when people were, when our enemies would be out getting swallowed by fish. And
Yep, but you can see that the guy is military, right? He's got a
Right.
shield, he's got a sword, right? Now, of course, he doesn't look Egyptian, but that's artistic, right? That's artistic license. This guy looks like a Roman soldier, right? He's got the Roman helmet, right? The helm, right? He's got the Roman helmet. He's even got a Roman mail. The other thing that kind of gives it away is the horse. The horse floating here behind you. That's Pharaoh and his soldiers, right? His chariots.
So
His
this probably represents the artists, the people that he knew, and the soldiers that he knew, and what they look like. So we can
100%,
date it. Yeah.
100%. But this is the midrash that we have, and the art oftentimes is depicting existing midrash that the fish swallowed up Pharaoh's armies, including his charioteers. And here's your horse. So there you can see they're in the water, and they're not only drowning, but they're getting swallowed up. So we depicted people getting swallowed by fish, and people were always thinking about these kind of things. People maybe had fear of going in the water even before Jaws, right? They had fear of going into the water. But we didn't do Jonah that much. Jonah was not the top of our art, not even close. Red Sea, stuff from Egypt, very popular for a lot of reasons, not least of which is that Egypt was a popular motif in the ancient world. People in Greece and Rome loved doing Egyptian style, nature scenes, scenes by the Nile, and Egyptian style was popular back then. And we also had like things that became like motifs in synagogues that we're not really sure why they were so popular, but they were. Like the Tower of Babel, the construction of the Tower of Babel, we have lots of mosaics of that. We're like, why that? I mean, why is that the thing that, there's some theories about why the Tower of Babel was kind of captivated our imagination, but those we see in a lot of mosaics. Obviously, I'm not talking about the other things like the seasons that we see, the zodiac that we see, like every mosaic. I'm talking about the biblical pictures that captivated us enough to say, let's put that on our synagogue. Let's keep that image. But
Could just be a fad.
Yeah, could be, but we don't.
Absolutely, the style. I mean, think about all the congregations that had Chagall style
Yep.
art of whatever.
Yep.
That's the age.
No, but take that, right? So one of the things that people did, because Chagall did it, was they did 12 tribes. Even if they didn't do Chagall 12 tribes, they did their own 12 tribes, which became like somewhat a representation of the different people, like saying 12 tribes is kind of like implying Jewish diversity and Jewish, Sephardic Jews and Mizrahi Jews and Jews from Europe and different parts of Europe, not just, German Jews, but Russian, so the different tribes also became in the 50s and 60s, as Israel was a country and as America became a haven for Jews from lots of different places, the tribes became a popular thing, but also, Chagall's, sets the tone for that. So artistic styles become fads and again, like when it's a biblical image, we want to know the significance of it. We want to know, do they know something? Do they have something to teach us? There's something we can learn from it? And what's interesting about the art is that it is a midrash, right? So there is a interpretation in there, and in some cases, it's a known interpretation. It's like, oh, that midrash on the Tower of Babel about how they built it. Bavel, has a lot of midrash, and some of those midrashim are there in the art. So we say, oh, where that midrash, you want to see that midrash in art? Here's the imagination of somebody who took that midrash and then made a picture of it. So it's pretty cool that we know, like when we see those, we go, oh yeah, we know that midrash. So people do that, and when they're studying the art, they'll say, oh, look at this little thing here, this little detail here tells us that they were following this midrash. So it's pretty cool. But back to Jonah and being in the fish. A couple things here. Well, actually, let's just look real quickly at the commentary on this. Let's look at Rashi, because Rashi shares with us one of the most famous midrashim. It says right here that God provided a huge fish, Dag Gadol, which, by the way, is another phrase that we had repeated over and over again. Gadol, right? Or Gedolah, a big tempest, a big storm, big fear, big word. It's a big word in Jonah. It's bigly. Everything for Jonah was bigly. No, well, at least for the writer of Jonah. So here's the thing. It's a big fish. Now, we know that. We know it's a big fish. It was big enough to swallow him. But maybe it was too big. The Midrash actually has it that the fish was too big. So it says here, Dag Gadol, and the fish, he was inside the fish for 3 days. And then it says, and then he prayed. And so the rabbis deduced from this that something happened inside that fish, or again, let's look what happens. It was a male, and he stood with room so that he did not think to pray. He's in a big fish, and it's too big. He doesn't seem to care. But then it says in this line here, it says that he prayed from inside the belly of the fish. Now, what's interesting about this is that same phrase, the belly, is the description of where he went inside the ship. So he went into the belly of the ship, the hold, we translated it, but it's the belly of the ship. But now he's in the belly of the fish. But what's interesting about this fish, or I shouldn't say this fish, but the rabbis interpret it as this fish, it says daga. Now, the word daga, hadaga, they interpreted it as, and they did it, they knew Hebrew. Don't trust me. It's not like they didn't know Hebrew. They translated or interpreted daga as a female fish. Daga literally means, hadaga can mean directionally from within the fish. When we say daga with the hey at the end, hadag would mean from, would just be the fish, mime hadag. But hadaga means from within the belly of the fish, the direction of the fish. The hey at the end could be the directional the directional, again, saying from the fish. So if you say, I'm speaking to you from the south, you say, min hadroma, I'm speaking to you from the south. That's just saying directionally, I'm here in the south and I'm speaking to you from the south. South of the country, I'm speaking to you from, that's just a directional term. But they interpreted it as a female fish. And from that, they get the Holy One, blessed be he, hinted to the fish, and it spewed him into the mouth of a female, which was full of embryos, and it was crowded there, and he prayed there from the belly of the fish. So the interpretation is that Jonah wasn't in just one fish, he was in two fish. Yeah. And the second fish that he went to was a female fish, and that fish was crowded with caviar. Well, still fish eggs. Hasn't been prepared as a caviar, but it is fish egg. And so he went from being in a cavernous space inside a male fish to a really tight space with fish eggs all around him. And that is not comfortable for Jonah. But the interpretation from this is that Jonah at first is fine being in the belly of the fish. He doesn't care. Now you'd say to yourself, what do you mean? He's inside a fish. Does he want to get out of the fish? But the rabbis interpreted the fact that he's there for 3 days and then he prays. What do you do for the first 3 days? Finally, he decides to pray. So they like the idea better that he was in one fish and then got into the other fish. And that's what made him pray. Like that Jonah would have been okay just being inside the fish, which again follows the interpretation that he doesn't want to do the job and he really doesn't care. As long as he doesn't have to do the job, he's fine. He's fine being in the fish. The rabbis also interpret the word vayiman, which is the word that for he provided, God provided. The word in Hebrew is man, which they also connect to the word manna, which is when God gives us something like a fish to swallow us or gives us food in the wilderness to eat, that it's a miracle and God can do things like that. So here it says, God took this manna and sustained the fish so that Jonah would not be digested in its intestines. And Jonah too ate within it from manna. So what's interesting is that Jonah in the belly of the fish for 3 days, he didn't go hungry. He had manna. The fish had manna and Jonah had manna. Why? Because the word is vayiman. So if you want to know what Jonah ate, which I'm sure somebody asked the rabbi once, what did Jonah eat in the fish? They said, oh, he ate manna. Why? Because it says vayiman, that he gave him, he provided for him. And obviously he provided the fish, the dog, to give to save him. But they interpreted further that it was also manna that he ate. And the manna not only sustained Jonah, but it sustained the fish, so he wouldn't digest them. So if you're wondering, how did Jonah survive there? What did he eat? That's what he did. So that's the midrashic interpretation of what happens to Jonah inside the fish for those days that he was there. There's other midrashim, there's other legends about what Jonah saw during his time, because the fish moves around and the fish goes all over the place. The fish goes underground because according to, again, kind of our conception of the world at that time, is there was oceans underneath the land. Which isn't quite wrong. There's just not oceans of water. They're oceans of molten lava core, mantle, but no, they assumed that there was water underneath the earth and that Jonah is going underneath the water. So the waters of the Mediterranean, of the Great Sea, which is where he went in, would be connected to the waters that you'd pop up to, let's say, the Tigris-Euphrates River, which is where he's going to come up to when he goes to Nineveh. We'll get to that when we get to the end of this chapter 2. But you can see there's a lot here in these first two verses. But the idea that the waters are all connected, the idea that Jonah went on some journeys underneath the water are connected to a couple of questions that we might have, that we might have or might not, but I'll tell you what the questions are when we get to the end of this story. But there is midrash about Jonah in the whale, a lot of midrash, because it captures the imagination. And for us, it wasn't necessarily always depicting it in art, but it was depicting it in midrash. What we can take away from it, what other lessons can we learn from this? Which, of course, according to Rashi, who's quoting the midrash, Rashi didn't make up that interpretation. He's quoting the midrash. He just synthesized the midrash. Jonah is fine being in the belly of the fish because people, unless they're really uncomfortable, still don't do what they're supposed to do when they're told what they got to do. And if they don't want to do it, they don't do it. And what Jonah does is very consistent with human behavior, with our psychology. Jonah is okay being in the belly of the fish, according to the rabbis. No issue. He would have stayed there forever, according to our interpretation. He's in no hurry to get out. Any questions or comments?
I don't know, it's been said like snails won't leave their shell unless, they grow bigger and they have to leave their shell in order to grow another shell. It's very uncomfortable and a difficult thing to do, to change.
Yep. And that is a good analogy, Gail, because this is not gonna be an easy transition, for Jonah to come out of that shell or come out of that fish, come out of that stage of his life. Yep, it's a good analogy. So now we're going to change course inside the belly of the fish. Now we're going to change course dramatically because now we no longer have a narrative. Now, not only do we not have a narrative, because we're going to go into a poem style, we're going to go into a slightly different Hebrew style, slightly, not tremendously different, but some scholars have pointed out that it's a little bit different. And we're going to a first-person testimonial. We were just listening to somebody tell us the story of Jonah. Now we're going to hear from Jonah. Let's hear from Jonah. This is
sorry, I hit the wrong button here. Hang on a minute. Oh, gosh.
The first person starts right after the word Vayomer, Harati. No worries.
Oh, I lost it. Again. Here. Here we go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
He said, "In my trouble, I called to God, who answered me. From the belly of Sheol, I cried out, and you heard my voice. You cast me into the depths, into the heart of the sea. The floods engulfed me. All your breakers and billows swept over me. I thought I was driven away out of your sight. Would I ever gaze again upon your holy temple? The waters closed in over me. The deep engulfed me. Weeds twined around my head. I sank to the base of the mountains. The bars of the earth closed upon me forever. Yet you brought my life up from the pit, my eternal God. When my life was ebbing away, I called God to mind, and my prayer came before you into your holy temple. They who cling to empty folly forsake their own welfare. But I, with loud thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you what I have vowed I will perform. Deliverance is God's.
That's the end of the poem. That's the end of Jonah's prayer. We call that Jonah's prayer. So these verses, it's basically a total of 7 verses of Bible verses. This is Jonah's prayer. There's a theory that this is what we had is Jonah's prayer, and that somebody else came along and wrote the narrative that's on both sides of it. Why? Because the Hebrew is a little different. It's written in first person. We don't usually have something that's there's a fundamental problem here. I'm going to point it out to you, though you might see it. Not one place in this poem does it say anywhere that Jonah got swallowed by a fish. There doesn't seem to necessarily be a real deep connection between this prayer and the story that we read before and after. And so people have said, it seems as though somebody made the story around this very famous prayer, this beautiful prayer that kind of, if it taken out of context, how do you necessarily get from here to the I got swallowed by a fish? Now look, the belly of Sheol, which is understood as like the pits of hell, or the pits of the netherworld, necessarily hell in the punishment kind of imagery that we have, but it's from the lowest place, the belly of, and again, it's a slightly different word, and I don't want to say this is a different writer, because of this, but it uses the word beten, which literally means womb, or literally the belly, rather than saying the hold or the belly of the fish. Mime could mean like within the innards of it, inside it. Beten literally is the belly. That's your beten. It is also, when we say somebody is inside a person, rather than just like talking about the female anatomy, we would say that's also a word used for, the child being carried in the belly, rather than less necessarily like the uterus, if you will. Just, it's almost like if you use that phrase beten with child, with in that context, it would be like, oh, she's got a bun in the oven kind of thing, it's in her belly, right? So it's used for that.
Well, we use that in English too. We say she's
100%.
Just
Yeah, it's 100% where we're not really talking about, but that's when it's used also. It's not always used that way, but it is used that. But okay, so the belly of Sheol, which again could be a poetic description for being inside a fish, but it also could be like from the depths of despair, I called out to you. Now, of course, it does say the sea, right? It says into the heart of the sea, which is the word there is levav, which is lev, right? The word we use for heart, or heart mind, if you will. Let's see. Here it says, Yam, the waters closed over me. The deep, the word tehom, which is the depths of the ocean, poetically used as what we have at the beginning when God was over the waters. But tehom is also, according to some linguistic, the people who look at biblical structures and biblical Hebrew words, tehom is also the name for one of the names or one of the gods of the oceans. Tiamat in ancient Near Eastern, it's the same word Tiamat was the gods of the ocean, or the god of the ocean. And again, it seems like the person's underwater. But it doesn't seem like the person's in a fish. On the contrary, it seems like the person's in the water. Weeds, seaweeds, right, are over his head. So it seems like he's drowning, which is interesting because this is definitely somebody who feels depressed. Everything that's used in this description of where Jonah feels, or Jonah is providing an insight into his emotions, he feels despair. And all the words that are used here for despair are words that we still use today. Poetically, people would use these phrases to say, I felt, and we even say, I was underwater. I felt like I was drowning. Felt like I was sinking.
I was over my head.
Yep. We use all of these phrases today to describe depression and feeling overwhelmed. Everything that Jonah says here is consistent with somebody who's sad. Did somebody take license with this and say, let's tell a story about Jonah where he gets thrown into the water? Now, what's interesting, again, is that so there's somewhat of a of the disconnection between the poem and what the story seems to be saying. It's definitely maybe not as even consistent with the way that we get Jonah. Like, here's the problem. This is where Jonah changes. This is where Jonah shifts, at least for the moment, by the way. I want to say momentarily shifts. But Jonah's turnaround, if you will, is here when he says this. So we don't really know what made him get to this point. The rabbis then have to interpret that he's uncomfortable. The rabbis interpret that he's uncomfortable, which is why he finally gets it, right? He gets in line because he's uncomfortable and he's finally gonna do the right thing. I say, again, momentarily, because those who've read the story know that this is not a full conversion, if you will. But here Jonah is at despair, a great despair. It says that God heard my voice. He hasn't heard his voice yet, but it could be again, God, hear my voice. You will hear my voice, God. I cried out and you heard my voice. It's a plea, it's a petition rather than a done deal. But that's what we have to interpret it like this. If we interpret, or if we don't interpret, if we kind of read it in its plain language, this seems to be a person who believes in God and doesn't want to be away from God. And so, I mean, it worked well enough that people for thousands of years have read this as a story and said, what a powerful story of a person who prays to God and who didn't want to do the right thing or do the thing that God wanted him to do. And then he does it. And again, within this poem, there is the admission of his own depression, his own feelings of being away from God. He says, I would I ever gaze again upon your holy temple, right? Which, by the way, seems to imply that there's still a holy temple at this time. One that he'd like to gaze on, he'd like to look at it again. I'd like to be there. And again, used here again to come into your holy temple, to pray into your holy temple. There is an admission and a statement of the fact that other people cling to empty folly, right? There are people out there who are worshiping or doing things or believing in things that are wrong. But I'm sacrificing to God. I am vowing, I'm going to fulfill my vows, which again, we had before with the sailors making vows. It's one of the reasons why we read it at Yom Kippur, talks about vows. So God is good, is merciful, is going to fix my problem. God will make me, when you think about why Jonah does what he does, what was his motivation to say this? The story provides an answer to it. It's a backstory, if you will, to, again, maybe people say a poem that we already had. And that's why, people have said that they were written at different times by different people. Then there still comes the question, why do we have Jonah's story? And we'll get to that. But I think we have to read the whole story before we answer that question. Why do we have this story of Jonah built around this prayer? So this is, it's a different style. It's a different voice. It is similar to other parts or prayers maybe we'd have in the Bible, but there aren't many. So there aren't many times when somebody in the first person gives us a prayer, gives us a statement of theological belief and kind of their own, what you could say is kind of like a outpouring of their heart to God. So this is, again, usually called the prayer of Jonah. And there are people who have quoted this and have incorporated it into their own prayers or their own way of kind of expressing themselves to God. And then we have the last line of chapter 2, which goes back to the narrative.
God commanded the fish, and it spewed Jonah out upon dry land.
Now, anybody want to say anything about the fish? Because this is the other line of the fish. There's 3 lines of fish. This is the other line of fish. Anybody have a comment? Well, I will tell you, it went back to a male fish. Well, if it ever wasn't a male fish, it's now back in the male fish. So the idea was that Jonah was in the female fish, got spit back into the male fish, and then that male fish then spews them up onto the dry land. Why? Because that was Jonah's fish. It was Jonah's fish that took him around was this fish, this special fish. So this fish takes him to where he needs to go. But yeah, this is back to a dog. But it gets back to the other question. Where was Jonah when he got out of the fish? And so the rabbis like this idea that while he's in the fish, he's traveling around under the waters. As a matter of fact, when it says, "Will I ever gaze on the temple?" he's actually underneath the temple when he says that. So he's underneath the temple. Why? Because he started out in the Mediterranean, out by Jaffa. He's underneath the water. And when he's underneath the temple, that's when he goes, "Hey, will I ever be able to come up to the temple and see it? Because I'm underneath it right now." Why? Because he's going underneath the water. He's all underneath the water, and he's popping up underneath Nineveh, in the river right outside of Nineveh. Why do we even have that? why do we even have that? Why do we even have this midrash? Because it says he spewed him up on dry land, right? Right, Rosemary?
Right.
By the way, the word spewed is an accurate translation. It's a good translation. It's a good translation because the word, which we don't have a lot in Hebrew, thankfully, vayakeh. When we use the word spew, it just doesn't just mean he came out. He was spewed, which is the word for vomited. He vomited Jonah out on the dry land. Or he spit him out onto the dry land. But he came out of his mouth, and he came out maybe with more force than just he walked off the tongue onto the dry land. So, what's the lesson from this? Well, the next lines are, let's read.
The word of God came to Jonah a second time. Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it what I tell you. Jonah went at once to Nineveh in accordance with God's command. Nineveh was an enormously large city, a 3 days walk across.
Okay, so here's the issue. If Jonah comes out of the belly, and again, it says that God said it to him a second time, how close was he to Nineveh? And so that's why the rabbis have this idea that he got spewed out. Either the fish came back up came out the Tigris River right in front of Nineveh, right in Mosul, today's modern day city of Mosul, spit him out right by where he needed to be. So he didn't have to walk very far. He wasn't going to get in any trouble because he's right there. Or in the Midrashic interpretation, that fish doesn't just spit him out a little bit, it spits him out a lot. And he just goes traveling through the air as he spit out, and he winds up in front of Nineveh that way. The fact that he doesn't have to walk very far. Wherever he was when God came to him the second time, when he's out on the dry land, it wasn't very far. Look, the rabbi's idea that Jonah gets vomited right out in front of Nineveh, whether the fish came out, popped up in Nineveh, or he gets vomited by air to Nineveh's doorstep. I don't know. I mean, once you're saying the guy's inside the belly of a fish, is it really that? If God can do that, is it really unbelievable that God can make that fish pop out in the Tigris, or that God can make that fish have him vomited to Nineveh? So that's where we go with the midrash there, which is that Jonah doesn't have to go very far to go to Nineveh. And it's same phrase, kum, right? It's a little different in it. Proclaim to it what I tell you. He already told him. But it says kum, get up, go. And then it says, vayikam. Finally, Jonah vayikam. Now it translates it as that he did it at once. It doesn't say at once, but the word vayakam, that he gets up and goes, is enforced or kind of like the language is conveyed by he went at once, because it does say vayilech, but the fact he also vayakam, that he got up, is the why they translated as went at once. But it also could be translated, Mary, what does the King James say? Or is Mary there?
It says, So Jonah arose and went into Nineveh according to the word of the Lord.
Yeah. So it does not translate it as went at once. They literally translate it as vayakam, and Jonah arose, which to me is probably a better translation because it doesn't necessarily mean he got up right away, but we like the idea that he does it finally, he does it and he does it quick. But the word vayakam is the fulfillment of kum lech. So it says kum lech, get up and go, and it says vayakam vayelech, and he did. He arose and he went. So it says get up and go, and he says and he got up and went. That's the way it really should be translated because he fulfills what God told him. And again, it is that getting up, which we have as a directional idea that we see in Jonah, right? Which is he goes away, he goes down, and finally he's getting up. He's getting up. And we say the same phrase today. He rose to the occasion. He rose and he went. Now, again, how far he went is rabbinic interpretations on how far he had to go, because the rabbis like the idea that he didn't have to go far, because the rabbis get it, which is Jonah doesn't want to do this. So if Jonah has a really, really long walk, maybe he's not going to go. And so God makes it so that Jonah will do it. And he does that by shortening the distance from the land of Israel to Nineveh. So they don't like the idea ever that Jonah just popped out of onto the dry land at Jaffa where he started, which, by the way, is a whole nother interpretation, which is that Jonah has to do this walk. Jonah has to do it. The rabbis don't like it because they know human behavior, which is give someone enough time, they'll change their mind. I mean, they'll not change their mind. They'll go back to what they wanted to do in the first place, which is not do this. So they like the idea he doesn't have a long walk. I just will tell you that. That's almost universal in the Midrash. Nobody that I know of, again, it would be a more modern Midrash, is that Jonah has to do this long walk alone after he gets spit out by the fish. But it's not the traditional direction that it goes. So again, just pointing out, Ir Hagdolah, great, big city, the big city. So the word Gadol is there again. Okay. So it is a big city, Ir Gadolah. There's the name of it in Hebrew, Nineveh. All right. And it says it's a 3-day walk across, which is a huge city, right? That's an enormous city by any standards. And again, according to what we know archaeologically, during this time, Nineveh was one of the greatest cities, if not the greatest city in the world at the time. The rabbis knew that. History knew it. It was well known that Nineveh was the great city during that period. The Assyrian Empire was the largest empire at the time, and it was a major city that Jonah is told to go. That is 100% the Midrash. It's the legend. It's the text. It's the everything. Nineveh was the major city of the world at that time. Okay, so they knew what they were talking about when they said that. Whether it's a 3-day walk or not might be an exaggeration, but that's not the point. The point is that, again, 3 days, like 3 nights in the belly, 3 days in the belly, symbolic, right? 3 days, 3 days.
Jonah started out and made his way into the city the distance of 1 day's walk and proclaimed, 40 days more and Nineveh shall be overthrown.
Now, it's a lot to decompress here. Okay. First of all, Jonah goes in 1 day's journey. Now, some people say, well, did he go to the middle of the city, which would have taken him about a day or day and a half to get to the middle of the city? Did he go into the middle of the city and do it? Or did he go about a third of the way and just say, that's enough, I've gone far enough? Is he supposed to say this throughout his walk? It says Jonah started out and made his way to the city and proclaimed 40 days more and Nineveh will be over. So is he walking along the street for a day and going 40 days more and Nineveh overthrown, just 40 days more over Nineveh, like just walking through doing that, which is something that prophets did, which was repeat their prophecy. It's 5 words, right? It's not a very long prophecy, a very short prophecy. This is the prophets, folks. We're reading the books of the prophets. We just read pages and pages and pages of prophecy from Ezekiel and Isaiah and Jeremiah. A lot of prophets, a lot of text, a lot of words. This is 5 words. The whole prophecy in the book of the prophets, right? There's 4 chapters here. It's in the book of the prophets. There are 5 words to the prophecy. That's it. Jonah's prayer, it's prayer. There's prayers and kind of texts of what prophets say in the books of the prophets. We saw it. We saw some of it. It's not as long as Jonah's prayer, but there are prophetic texts that are obviously also have narratives. But we don't have a book of the prophets that has 5 words of prophecy. There's 5 words. 5 words of prophecy here. That's it. Book has 5 words of prophecy. That's it. That's it. Now, it's also the only prophecy that we'll see that ever is listened to and is fulfilled during the prophet's lifetime. No other prophet's successful. Every other prophet is successful only in hindsight and in inspiration and in warnings and in conditional, like, don't let this happen. This is the only one who actually works. It's the only prophet who, well, the prophets inspire us because they talk about, as we saw, even just last in prophet and Amos and even the little part we read of Obadiah. I mean, the little 1 chapter prophecy that we have from Obadiah. There's hope. Things will happen good eventually. Like that's one of the other things the prophets do, but they don't give their prophecy and then people listen to them. That's not what prophets do. At least there's no successful prophet that we know of, except for Jonah. And his prophecy is 5 words. 5 words. So this is crazy. And again, we want to make it very clear that this is the most, a fish swallowing a person and then spitting them and all that. That's not the most amazing thing in the story. The most amazing thing in the story is this. He gives 5 words, and as we'll see, the people listen. I'm not ruining the story by telling you that, but I'm making the case here that these are 5 words that are the prophetic, that are the prophetic success story. So does he fulfill the mission with his full heart, goes out in the middle, says it, or does he go 1 day? And he's supposed to go 3 days. He's supposed to go across the whole city saying 40 days more, and he doesn't. He does like a minimal job by going a third of the way in. Or does he go into the middle? I mean, both could be possible. They're both possible. But there is this possibility that he's supposed to walk across the whole city and say this. Tell everybody, walk across the city and make sure everybody hears it. Or does by going in the middle of the city and saying it, is that going to make the message go viral, as we would say today? Or does he need to have frequency? Does he need to have, as much, does he need to have enough media saturation that he has to have it all, as many people have to hear it as possible? We don't know. But we do know that it's 3 days and he goes 1 day across. So the 3 day across isn't just symbolic. It's actually critical for the next line and for an assessment of, does Jonah do his job with his full kavanah, with his full intention? Or is he, as we're going to see, maybe not so into this? So there it is, 40 days more. Now, we did not hear God say this specifically. This is the first time we've heard this. Out of Jonah's mouth, we get this. Now, it does say here in verse 2, go tell Nineveh what I will tell you. So assumedly, what God tells him is 5 words. Okay. 40 days more and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the word in Hebrew is literally nahapechet, which means turn over. I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to flip it upside. I'm going to turn it upside down. I'm going to flip it up. That's the word. I'm going to flip it. So 40 days, also obviously symbolic.
This relate I'm to teshuva, to turn
Yeah.
over to.
Yeah, well, you could say that, but usually the phrase means teshuva sometimes means like a 360 day, excuse me, a 360 degree um uh, thing. This is more of 180 degrees, which is I flipped it upside down. And why I say teshuva is usually 360 is that what we say about teshuva is that when we really made teshuva is not that we flipped, that we are a different side of us, but that when we get to the same situation that we were at before, we don't make the same mistake. So how do we know we've made real teshuva? At least according to our tradition, you come full circle. You come to that same place and don't make that. So you almost have to come back around. So like when we say, it's 360 degrees. You really wanted to say it's 180 degrees. You changed, you flipped. But in this, we also understand a 360 degree change is really the more powerful one because it's not that you're flipped. It's not like you're the other side of you, but it's the full side of you. It's just you're changed, you're different. And so that when you are in that same situation, you're not making the same mistake anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the end, you can't be 180 degree flip. 180 degree flip is somebody who has multiple personality disorder. It's somebody who literally says, "Oh, I have a dark side, and I'm going to flip to the dark side now." That's not a healthy person. The 180 degree flip for a person is not a good flip. And so it's an interesting idea that they have to make teshuva, right? They're going to have to make teshuva, and as we're going to actually see, that they do teshuva. We're going to get to their teshuva. It's also not very well documented. But again, Jonah's prophecy, which is here in verse 4, is the only prophecy here. It's the only prophetic word. So that was it. You saw it. It was over. If you blinked, you missed it. But that's the part in quotes. And that's assumedly, again, the part that God put in his mouth. When a prophet speaks and they're speaking on behalf of God, that's what God's words were. That's why it's in quotes. So, and that's also the other part of Jonah's words that are the dialogue, if you will. Although this is really a monologue to some extent, and it's not even his, it's God's. But that's what God said. So here's the next line.
The people of Nineveh believed God. They proclaimed a fast, and great and small alike put on sackcloth. When the news reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off his robe, put on sackcloth, and sat in ashes.
So these are acts of teshuva. This is what somebody who is repenting does. They almost again go through these death rituals, which are putting on sackcloth, putting on ashes, taking off your clothes, putting on different kinds of clothes. In this case, the people of Nineveh fasted. And what's interesting is that it says that they proclaim the fast, the people proclaim the fast. So this is an example of a popular uprising, a popular revolution. This goes to the people first, and then it gets back to the king. So this is the king responding to his population. He doesn't do something first. He hears the people and then he does it. So he goes even further, which is again, they put on sackcloth. He sits in ashes when he does it. So he goes even further. But again, there's a fast. One of the reasons why we read it at Yom Kippur, there's a fast. More connections, lots of stuff. So it says that they believed him. Again, what's interesting about just pointing this out for those who want to follow this linguistically or what the significance of it is, it says that the people believed God. It doesn't say they believed Adonai. It doesn't use the word Yud He Vav He, which we have, all over the place. When it says that Jonah did what God said, it says Kedavar Adonai. It's Yud He Vav He. Here, oh, that's interesting. I didn't notice that. I just noticed something that I'd never noticed before in the Hebrew. Maybe I did, but I've forgotten, and I will remind you, or I'll remind myself, or I'll enlighten people right here on it. It says Ir Gedolah Elohim. It says a city of God, and it didn't translate those words, but I just looked at it and it says, because I was looking at the words Adonai and Elohim, then I noticed that it says it's a city of God, which is interesting because, well, it's interesting for a lot of reasons. But again, we know God, and the reason they translated it as God, or it's translated as Lord, it's the word Adonai, it's the Yud He Vav He name, it's the word that we use for God. But God speaks to us as Adonai, but to other people, they know God simply as God, which is Elohim, city of God. And it says right here that they believed Elohim. Vaya'aminu anshe Nineveh Elohim. The people believed in God. Believe God. It does say Be Elohim, but they believed God. But it used the word Elohim. It did not use the word Yud He Vav He. It did not use the personal name of God that we use, or we don't use, but we call him by. We write it. We don't say it. We put it in the Torah, right? But we don't say it. But it says that they did. And again, the word Vayaminu is like the word Amen. It means they saw the truth. They agreed with God. They believed. It's the root Emet. And so Amen, Emet, all those words are connected. Or this idea that they believe God. And it says they proclaimed a fast. And so they did it. And then the king does. Any questions, comments? All right. And then here's what happens next.
And he had the word cried through Nineveh by decree of the king and his nobles. No human or animal of flock or herd shall taste anything. They shall not graze and they shall not drink water. They shall be covered with sackcloth, human and animal, and shall cry mightily to God. Let everyone turn back from their own evil ways and from the injustice of which they are guilty. Who knows but that God may turn and relent? God may turn back from wrathfulness so that we do not perish.
Yeah. So they use the word, the king uses the word Elohim. I will point out here, it does say Ha Elohim, the God, but he says here El Elohim. I mean, it's not like, don't think that like that by itself means that like they don't get God. Well, look, the point is that they listen to God, right? And the king reinforces what just happened with a royal edict, a decree of the king and the nobles, it says. And by the way, the word for noble is Gedolav, which is the great dignitaries, the great, the grandees, by the way, would be the most accurate word of translation of grandees. That animals are also not supposed to eat anything. And the animals are in sackcloth. So it's not just people that have to follow this. The animals have to follow it too. That is a heavy duty fast. The animals are going to be implicated in this too. Well, the animals are going to suffer. If Nineveh is overturned, it's not just people, but animals that are going to be affected. The animals were affected in the plagues. So it's not like God spares the animals when bad things happen. The animals are at risk here. So the animals need to also be protected, if you will. They need to do what they need to do to protect themselves. And that image of animals in sackcloth is kind of funny, I guess. I think there is a humor element to this story that I think people miss. And I think they miss it at their peril, because on one hand, people are like, you can't take this story seriously. Or there are people who say, oh, absolutely, you have to take this story seriously. But I don't think people also get that taking it seriously could also mean not necessarily, believing that there's a lesson here, but then also we can laugh at this too. We can also laugh at what lengths people will go to in order to like get their, get right with God, if you will. And to some extent, a reminder that animals suffer when humans suffer. Mary, in verse 8, and I'm putting to point this out too for an obvious reason, but when it says, let everyone turn back from their evil ways, right? Their evil ways, that's darko hara'ah, that's their evil ways. You've got to change your evil ways. Babe. Yeah, that's the Santana song right there. But the next is, we translate it as from the injustice of which they are guilty. That is not the translation that I would choose for the next word, which Mary says what?
From the violence.
Yeah, violence seems a whole lot stronger than injustice. And of course, I'm not saying that just because it's a difference of translation and I wanted you to see the English. I wanted you to see the Hebrew. The Hebrew is min Hamas. Exactly. Min Hamas. So there you have it again. When you see the word in Hebrew, and especially now, we want to point out that, yeah, it's not injustice, it's violence. That's what the word means. It means violence. So maybe God will relent. Maybe God will yashuv. That's the root for teshuvah. Maybe God will do teshuvah. Well, in the sense of God relenting and God changing. God will change. And then nicham, and cool off. God will relax. The word nicham has a root of nicham means like the name Menachem or the name or the word nechama. It means rest. It means be at peace. Maybe God will chill out. In my translation, who knows? Me, oh damn, right? Who knows? Maybe God will change. And God's wrath, Charona Po, is God's wrath. I mean, the bad side of God. You're going to get the bad side of God. You're going to get God's hand right now. That's what they translated as wrathfulness, right? That's a serious deal. And again, here's what's interesting. Right here, this word.
God saw what they did, how they were turning back from their evil ways, and God renounced the punishment that had been planned for them and did not carry it out.
So God relented. God, it says, Vayinachem. God cooled off. God said, no, I'm not going to do it. And God didn't do it. It was all set up, but they did it. They did teshuvah. They achieved it. God looked at it. God saw it, right? That word vayara, vayara Elohim, God saw. Remember the beginning, Genesis, God would see things. Well, God saw this. God saw it. Said, no, it's good. God said, I'm not going to carry it out. It was going to happen. It's not going to happen now. So again, read this on Yom Kippur with the hope that if God had any punishments planned for us, we've done teshuvah, God will see us and God won't do it. That's our midrashic takeaway from this, right? Why are we reading this, right? Why is that guy buried in a sarcophagus with Jonah on it? Because he wanted to be resurrected. Why do we read this story on Yom Kippur? Because we want to be forgiven. We want God to change whatever punishment we're supposed to get. Please, God, don't do it. We'll change. We're changing. We get it. That's why we read it. So we're going to read the last chapter now. We're going to finish up with what happens to Jonah after this amazing, successful prophecy. Because Jonah was told to do something by God. He did it. They listened. That's happily ever after. That's the way the book ends if it's a happily ever after story. Folks, the Bible is not happily ever after. The Bible is never happily ever after. So for people who want happily ever after, read a fairy tale. It is not the Bible. It is not our story. Our story is always a little bit more complicated, and it's a little bit more, unfortunately, for the way life is, a little bit more complicated, and doesn't really end with everything being all cool. Hardly, because this is the way the story ends if it's just a fairy tale. Doesn't end this way. And by the way, good stories don't end like this. Stories that you actually learn stuff from and stay with you and are in your heart, they don't end like this. I mean, I don't think so. Good stories are much more complicated and they're more human. And this story is very human. And I will tell you, this is the way the story ends when you're a little kid. People listen to Jonah and they don't get punished. At a certain point, kids have to learn the way the story of Jonah really ends. We need to learn it right now, because this story doesn't end on a happy ending. Doesn't even have an ending. Ends on a question. How many stories end on a question, by the way? Those are the really good stories. End of the question. So here's what happens at the end of the story.
This displeased Jonah greatly, and he was grieved. He prayed to God, saying, "Oh, Eternal One, isn't this just what I said when I was still in my own country? That is why I fled beforehand to Tarshish. For I know that you are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in kindness, renouncing punishment. Please, Eternal One, take my life, for I would rather die than live."
Now, this is where Jonah flat out says, I don't want to live anymore. That's what he said. It's very clear. Take my life. Now, of course, he doesn't want to kill himself. I don't want to kill himself. God, you take me out. Kill me, right? Take my life. Take my soul. Take it. Because I don't want to be here. It would be better for me to be dead than alive. That's what he says. Tov, better for me to die than mechai. I don't want to be alive. So he says to God, you are a good God. You are a compassionate God. God slow to anger. What we say exactly when we open up the ark on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and say, Adonai, Adonai, el rachum v'chanun, erach hapayim v'rav chesed. Here it says, v'necham al hara. We have this added thing that's not in the part that we say, which is what Moses says when he sees God's presence at Mount Sinai. That's what we recreate when we say Adonai, Adonai, el rachum v'chanun. Here is even a better line for Yom Kippur. You renounce punishment. Nicham. This is the phrase that's used over and over again in this chapter. Nicham, in chapter 3. You relent, you renounce, you calm down. That's the theme in this. Nicham. God is not going to do it. God's going to relent from punishment. Look, that's what we're hoping for. We're hoping for that. But Jonah doesn't want that. Jonah wants punishment. Now, he doesn't want it for himself, it's for other people. He doesn't necessarily, he's not thinking of himself. He's thinking about the people of Nineveh. And as we talked about before, this story is he's a foil because we know he's from the northern part of Israel, the part of Israel that got destroyed by the Ninevites not long after his life. So he's already dealing with the Ninevites. He doesn't like the Ninevites. For him to have gone through this story, whether he went through it or not, whoever imagined this is putting Jonah in this horrible position of arguing for, again, like, I don't want to save these people. They're going to kill my own family. They're going to kill my relatives. I don't want to see these people survive. And so that's why the story is so powerful, is we get it. Like, we're supposed to understand what Jonah is saying. And it's not a minor thing, which is that we don't want to see, we're not supposed to, as Jews, want to see people be punished, even people that deserve it, which is so important right now. This story that we're reading right now, which we read at Yom Kippur, and we'll read it in a few months at Yom Kippur, 6 months or so, we'll read it at Yom Kippur, and who knows where we're going to be in 6 months. But right now, every Jew in the world needs to remember that we don't celebrate when people who we are hating, that are our worst enemies, we don't celebrate their death. We don't want them to have to die. We would love for them to not hate us. We would love for them not to kill us. The answer is just kill them is not a Jewish answer. It's not the answer of Jonah. It's not the answer of Exodus, to some example. It's not the Jewish answer. So for people who are in their minds don't get this, and again, there are a lot of people who don't get it because they assume that we feel the same way about our enemies as other people do, including our enemies. We don't feel that way. And this is an inherent Jewish, we have to understand this is a Jewish value, because it's what keeps us from descending into the types of behaviors that we're trying to prevent ourselves from doing, which is very easy to do when you're trying to wreak vengeance on somebody, punish them, stop them from killing you in the future. How do you do it? And if you understand that this is as relevant today as it was 3,000 years ago, yeah. Jonah wants these people gone. He doesn't necessarily want to kill them. God will kill them, but he doesn't want to be part of saving them. Yeah. So much so, he'd rather not live himself. That's how much he feels passionate about this. He doesn't want them to survive because, again, he knows that if they're gone, they will never do the things to his people that he's afraid of. One can make the argument the person who wrote this already knew what was going to happen. He knew that the Assyrians were the people of Nineveh were going to destroy the northern kingdom. They knew that when they wrote this. So this is, again, to use the modern analogy, these are the people that go into Nazi Germany in 1938-39 and say to the Germans, turn around and don't, repent of your evil. And then they listen, they stop for some period of time, but then they're still going to wind up killing us. I mean, that's the equivalent, folks. That's what the Assyrians did to us. They murdered us. They exiled us. They destroyed the northern kingdom. They killed millions, perhaps, or at least hundreds of thousands of Israelites, of B'nai Israel. They killed them. We knew that. The person who wrote this knew that. And yet this book exists. This story exists as a Jewish story. Again, this is the problem that we have of answering these kinds of questions. And everybody knows it's the case, right? If Israel took Gaza and destroyed it, really committed genocide, really destroyed it, we would no longer have to worry about what would happen in the future. The children in today's Gaza some of them most likely are going to grow up and kill us in the future. That is can't be proven. It can't say what's going to happen. We don't know which kids are going to do it. But some of those kids that are going to be spared in Gaza right now by the Israeli government, by, again, a government that's trying to minimize civilian deaths, even while they're, again, dealing with life or death for their own soldiers. We know some of those kids are going to kill Jews one day. In 2006, for example, 18 years ago, when Israel was fighting another war with the people of Gaza, if those kids 18 years ago hadn't been born, they wouldn't have gone into the Nova Musical Festival and killed. They wouldn't have done what they had done. They wouldn't have been around. This isn't a theoretical pronouncement. That's a fact. It happened. So this is a theoretical question in the way it's been structured, perhaps, but it happened. The people of Nineveh killed us. And the person who wrote this knew that and still made us have to deal with this. This is why this is not a happy ending story. This is not a fairy tale. This is the theological question that strikes us as, again, an important lesson for us. Just how do you deal with evil in the world as human beings? How do we deal with this? Because the answer that we just kill groups of people because we know that they're capable, and not only capable, but being educated and being trained to kill, we can't use that as a basis for punishment ourselves. God's not going to do it. We can't do it. So it's a problem. It's a problem. It's a tough one to have to see. But we're seeing it right now. And I don't know, and I say this, and we talked about this every time we're in the midst of a war, whether it was 9/11 or whether it was Iraq, whatever war we've been in for the last 25 years that I've been rabbi at Temple Beth Ami, whatever situation we've been in where we've read this story at high holidays and said, what did we learn from this? This year? Yeah, this year, that's what's on my mind. Because I don't know that if I was Jonah and was told by God to go into Gaza and tell the people there to renounce their evil ways, or that they're going to be overthrown, or that I have to do anything to help them, I don't know that I'd do it. I don't know that I'd have the ability to not say what Jonah said, which is, God, kill me. I'm not going to do it. Let somebody else do it. I'm not going to do that. I don't know that I'm going to risk my life or spend 1 second to do this. I don't know. I don't know that I'd have the courage to do it. I don't know that I wouldn't have said what he just said. I don't know. So it's a difficult one for me to read now without thinking about that. Let's look at God, because God is not going to let Jonah off the hook. Let's read the lesson, the famous lesson that Jonah learns here.
God replied, "Are you that deeply grieved?" Now Jonah had left the city and found a place east of the city. He made a booth there and sat under it in the shade until he should see what happened to the city.
And here's something we sometimes point out. We'll point it out here because we have the Hebrew. it says he made for himself a booth. Vayas lo sham sukkah. He made a sukkah and he sat under it. So he made a sukkah, which is what we do right after Yom Kippur. We make a sukkah. We're supposed to go out of our fast, finish our fast, and we're supposed to put the first nail in our sukkah. So there's a sukkah. There's another connection, right? And he made it. So he made it and he sat under the shade. He wanted to see what would happen. Now, that's an interesting one because he just heard that they were saved, but he wants to see what happens. He wants to see maybe whether they're going to really repent. Maybe he wants to be on hand for them to start stepping out of line so he can say to God, look, you saved these people? They're trash. They're evil. These people are exactly what you knew and I knew they were. So he doesn't go. He wants to see something. That's what he says, until he should see. What's he talking about? He just heard there's not going to be any punishment, but it says he wants to see.
The eternal God provided a ricinus plant, which grew up over Jonah to provide shade for his head and save him from discomfort. Jonah was very happy about the plant.
Yes. And so here's the word.
I always thought that was a gourd.
Well, that's what it says. The meaning of the Hebrew uncertain, in contrast to others who put gourd. What does the King James have, Mary?
It says gourd.
Yes. Sometimes I'll have a note that's saying it's perhaps a castor plant. Castor. The word kikayon, we're not exactly sure what it is, which is why there are different notes. Of course, the interesting thing here is that it's the same phrase, vayaman, that we just had it, right? Vayaman, that God provided. So again, is it manna? Is it somehow connected to the kikayon that also had food on it for him? But this idea that there's food, that there's some kind of sustenance, is indicated by the word vayiman, which again is the root for manna, or it's connected to manna. It is something that's provided by God, right? So he's underneath the plant. It's giving him shade, but again, according to like the rabbinic interpretation of the word vayiman, it's also food. It's not just shade. He's also getting food from the kikayon. So if it's some kind of gourd, hey, it's a, it's a squash or some kind of, plant that he could eat. If it's a castor oil plant, it probably isn't just a castor plant, not a castor oil. You get castor oil from it, but probably didn't just want to eat, just eat that. Look at the next phrase.
But the next day at dawn, God provided a worm which attacked the plant so that it withered.
Yeah, and it's interesting, by the way, here. It says, Vayiman Adonai Elohim, which is God, Lord God, if you will, Adonai Elohim, which is why it says the eternal God. But here it says, the next day, God provided a worm, Vayiman Ha Elohim. There's no Adonai there. Some people have pointed out that, well, it could just be the way the author wrote it. Other people don't like that. You can't just say that. There's a word missing. But the answer here is that maybe when God does this, it's like a different aspect of God. That God, when destroys even a gourd, the word Adonai isn't mentioned in that, because God forbid the Lord, should be attached with destruction, if you will. It's more of the midrashic license, but the word Adonai isn't there. I only pointed it out because it's not there. But again, this worm destroys the kikayon, right? The kikayon is killed, and again, it's killed by God, right? So God destroyed it. It wasn't going to be destroyed, and God destroyed it because there's a lesson. God's teaching a lesson with that kikayon.
But Elohim is the word, right? He's using the same word that the Nineveh people
Yes.
use.
It's
Elohim.
the word for God, right? The generic God. So
So
that's one of the reasons why again Adonai isn't attached to the worm. Only Adonai is. I mean, only Elohim. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when the sun rose, God provided a sultry east wind. The sun beat down on Jonah's head, and he became faint. He begged for death, saying, I would rather die than live.
Wow. Same phrase he used before. Better to die than to live. So God didn't also God didn't just kill the Kikayon. Now God makes the wind, why it says sultry, because we're not really sure how to translate the word harishit, but harash. I mean, the root is, it's a bad wind. It's a eastern wind. Right? We know it's kadim. It's from the east. It's the Santa Anas. It's the bad winds of the east that would be very hard on Jonah. And again, this is Elohim doing it. It says Vayaman Elohim. It's Elohim doing it. It's not just it's not a normal act of nature. It's an act of God, right? So this is God making it even harder on him. And so once again, now it gets to the point that Jonah wants to die, right? So it's a really bad day for Jonah. I mean, this is almost supposed to be like Job-like problems, because gourd is done. It's no more food. He's got no shade. The weather is really, really bad. And now he says he wants to die again.
Then God said to Jonah, Are you so deeply grieved about the plant? Yes, he replied, so deeply that I want to die.
Okay, so you can see these discussions with this. Here he says, God says, are you that deeply grieved? Here, he uses the same phrase, but now he says to him, are you that upset about the Kikayon? Are you that? I mean, I would make sure you understand that he's like talking about the gourd, not just the wind and everything else, but whatever. He points out the gourd. Now there's a lesson here, right? And then why you translate it as plant, maybe not even gourd. You're that upset about a plant? You're that upset about a plant, Jonah? And he says, yeah. He says, yes. I'd rather be dead. I'd rather die.
Then God said, You cared about the plant, which you did not work for, and which you did not grow, which appeared overnight and perished overnight. And should I not care about Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not yet know their right hand from their left, and many animals as well?
That's the way the story ends. Now, some people put a question mark there, right? That was a note about what we're going to get to here, which is the last, the point of who's here. There's an exclamation. Some people translate it with a question mark. I was once asked by a Christian minister, like a trivia question, what book of the Bible ends in a question mark? And I was like, I don't know. He says the book of Jonah. Married in the King James, does it end in a question mark?
Yes, it ends in a question mark.
Now, this tells you a little bit about the difference between Jewish and Gentile translators. Jewish and Gentile approaches to the book of Jonah, or to Jewish theology to some extent, or the theology of the Bible. Why? Because, again, you're going to say, are you telling me really you could make a comment about punctuation? 100%. Because first of all, there's no punctuation in the Bible. So it's not like one is wrong or one's right. But in the Jewish mind, this is a rhetorical question. This isn't a question to be answered, right? Jonah, this isn't, you don't have the ability, and because I don't have the ability to mess around here, right? Jonah, there are kids, 120,000 kids in this town. There are a lot of animals that are innocent animals that are in the town. I can't destroy a city where there's people who are not yet responsible, and there are creatures that are not responsible. I can't just destroy it. I can't do that. Now, we know that Abraham, our ancestor, advocated on behalf of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So we know where we stand on this, which is, again, we're supposed to care about innocent people. We are 100%, again, supposed to understand that if there are innocent people that are in an area, we don't kill them, even when we're in a war. Okay? So that is the Jewish value here. It's not a question. It's not a question. You don't get to decide. That is, again, it's not what you want to do. It's not up to you, Jonah. This is the rule, man. This is the way that we live. This is our approach. This isn't a question. We don't say, hey, well, maybe these kids will grow up to be terrorists. We have to say, these are kids right now. They don't know any better. And we are not allowed to wipe them out because of what they might do. It's not a question. So we don't get to just say, hey, it doesn't matter, or it's a question, so I don't know. It's just not acceptable. It's not allowed. So understand that this is what lies behind what Israel will do over the next few weeks to end this war. Now, we're in a situation where, first of all, you and I, as observers, we have no idea what's really going on. We really don't. I 100% want to tell you, I believe that in the core of my soul, that there are things that are going on here that we don't know. And we can't know because they have to be negotiated without people knowing what's happening, because you just can't have these kind of negotiations in public. We don't know what's going on for the negotiation of these people that I wear a sticker for every day. By the way, interesting reactions, whether I'm in Las Vegas or Arizona or Southern California, all the places that I've been over the last 50 or so days since I've been wearing this, interesting reactions from almost always, by the way, really always positive when I explain what it is. Never had anybody say anything bad. A lot of people have no idea, and a lot of people joke with me when I'm wearing it. Like, what are you? Is that what place you came in, or you just came out of a conference or something? Like, you still have a sticker on you. And when I tell people it's not for a good reason, it already calms it down, or some. But a lot of people have engaged me, and in certain places, people are far more, like in Las Vegas, people are asking me a lot more than in other places. I only had one person in Arizona. Somebody said to me, that's for the people held hostage. And she shook my hand. She said, well, thank you for doing that. It's the only time I've ever had anybody right off the bat just say, that's what that's for. But yeah, I mean, right now, we don't know what's exactly happening. We don't know why Israel has not, for 100% sure, why Israel hasn't gone into Rafah to finish off the military campaign. We don't know for sure. And so I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to, we just don't know. But I do know that contrary to what people have said, that Israel 100%, the most right-wing people in the Israeli government, or at least in the military, or who have control over this decision, they have done everything they could to make sure that civilian casualties in the last part, through the other parts, that those will be minimized. But there is a war going on and innocent people will be killed. And I said that before the campaign started, that this was going to be a tough and there are going to be some difficult days for us as Jews, difficult days for people who love Israel. But understand that when kids and animals and innocent people who are not engaged in terror, who are not advocating for terror, the death and destruction of our people, this is something that causes us tremendous amount of pain, and it should cause us tremendous amount of pain. So how this ends, that's the question. I don't know how it's going to end. You don't know how it's going to end. I don't know that anybody for sure knows how it's going to end. I really don't. I think there's certain things that are more likely to happen, but I don't think that anybody knows for sure what's going to happen. But I do know that as Jews, the one thing I can be sure of is that we are not celebrating the number of deaths that are happening here. And that's what makes it much different for us than it does for, unfortunately, the people that we're fighting against. And it makes us different from a lot of other people in the world. And, I don't, again, I don't have answers. And the Bible, to some extent, has at least one answer, which is why I don't believe this ends in a question. But the one answer here is that we don't celebrate. We don't celebrate that. And and if we really think about it, if we're all God's creations, then we can't, if we care about God, we care about God's creations. And so it upsets us when it should upset us when a tree died. It did upset Jonah that his tree died. How much more so for animals and for people? And that's why the plant is the lesson, because animals on the hierarchy of life, animals and then people. And I'm telling you that as a vegetarian, there is a hierarchy. There's people, there's animals, and then there's plants. Animals I won't eat, plants I'll eat. I will, but for us, every form of life is sacred, and so we shouldn't like to see anything be destroyed. But this isn't a question. And of course, it's not a question for God. It's a question for us. So, yeah, it's a pretty powerful story. And as I told you, you'd see something different in this story this book, than you ever saw. And in this case, what can I tell you? Sometimes the stories are even more powerful than you thought they'd be at the beginning of the year. Because the last time I read this story, I had no idea that I would be sitting here thinking about the great city of Rafah. Any questions, comments, any thoughts for the future as we go out into the springtime, folks? I wish you a wonderful season of spring. I hope that it's filled with lots of potential, a lot of possibilities, all the things that spring is supposed to bring us. That we give thanks and praise to God, the creator of everything, plants, animals, people, and both the Dodgers and the Padres, to get back to where it was. Take care, everybody. Thank you for reading, and thank you, everybody, for being here together as part of this minion of studying.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye.